Hey guys, so I know that I told you that I was going to post part 2 on Saturday the 14th, but unfortunately I ran into a couple copyright issues, which is not uncommon. So I just re-edited the video and took out some clips. I had to do a few changes, so I just figured I'd post it today. But if you've not seen part 1, please go ahead and go into the first link in this video, and that will be part 1. I suggest you watch that first, or else this case is not going to make any sense to you whatsoever, because that gives you all of the background information of John List and how he began, what he did to his family, and what he was running from for so long. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed part 2 of this video. I love you. At this point, John has about a month's head start. That's when they know that something's wrong. They pretty much have a good idea that obviously John did this because there's a letter of admission, there's reasons. There was even notes, there were 2 letters, I guess, the one to the pastor and then another one that says, here's the guns and the ammo. Like, he left the murder weapons there. I mean, this guy was just so like matter of fact. I don't know. He didn't cover anything up. So they actually did search for 45 minutes before they found John's mother. That's how big this house was, this estate. And they said the entire time it was so creepy because of the classical music playing. They felt that it was almost like funeral music. It was really eerie and bizarre. So 2 days after finding the murdered bodies of the List family, they did locate his Chevy Impala that was parked at the JFK airport. And it did have a parking ticket thing, and I think that was dated November 11th or something like that. At that point, an APB goes out. They are on the hunt for him. The investigation starts. They know who they're looking for, and that's where the case is at this point. Meanwhile, over 2,000 miles away, John decides to go to Denver, Colorado because he wants to see the mountains and he just wants to start a new life. He ends up residing in a motel and changes his name to Robert P. Clark. Robert P. Clark actually happened to be a former classmate of his. So he took on this identity of one of his former classmates. Not exactly his identity, but he took on his name. He applied for a social security card, and I guess it was much easier to do back then because he got one. He ended up working as a line cook at a diner on the outskirts of town. He kept stressing in the interview that he, for the first time in a long time, I guess ever since he married Helen, he just felt burden-free. His family was a burden to him. The money was a burden to him. So him living in a motel, him having to be a line cook, it didn't bother him. It didn't hurt his ego. He didn't care because all he wanted was to not have this stress of having to maintain this lifestyle that his wife basically expected of him. But also that's how he courted her. So it's like, like he sort of created it, but then again, I mean, there's no excuse to murder your entire family. Like, why do these men not just believe in divorce? I mean, I get being religious, and I get that a lot of religions and some people, you know, they truly see it as sinful to get divorced and this and that, but I'm sorry, but when you compare murdering your family to getting divorced, when you weigh those 2 options, I feel like getting divorced is probably the better way to go and the less sinful way to go as well. So as time went on, he really began to enjoy his carefree life in Denver, Colorado. He rejoined a Lutheran church. Remember, he changed his name, and his old life seemed to fade away to him almost like a distant memory, almost like it was a different lifetime ago. You know how some people say, like, that feels like it was ages and age, like it was just a different lifetime. I can definitely think of moments in my life where I'm like, that was just a whole other lifetime. And to him, his family, his children, they were just like a bad memory, and it was starting to fade slowly and slowly away. He had no remorse. He didn't miss them. Nothing. Not a care in the world. So by 1985, List went back into his old career of business accounting. He began accounting again, and he was back as an active member in a Lutheran church. And in fact, once again, he met the friend of his neighbor at the time. By 1985, John List, now Robert P. Clark, went back to his old type of career, and he was in an accounting firm again, and he was back in the Lutheran church, and he met another woman who he did end up marrying, and her name was Dolores Miller. In 1986, he was 61 years old, and he was living the quiet life he wanted and was remarried back in Denver, Colorado. But meanwhile, back in the city of Westfield, every year on the anniversary of when the family massacre occurred, there would be publications in the media, in the newspapers, and people would always wonder what happened to John List, the man that massacred his entire innocent family. And people were angry. I mean, the second anniversary come up, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. I mean, he evaded them for almost 18 years. So every single year, the media would do stories on it. They would talk about it. They would do, memorials and stuff like that. And the detectives were determined to catch this man. They were not going to let him go and get away with this for the rest of his life. At some point, the FBI also got heavily involved in this case because this man was a fugitive of the law, and he was very, very dangerous. He was a cold, calculated killer. And the FBI would get a ton of tips. I think they got hundreds of tips all the time, but nothing amounted to anything. And it hurt. It also, at the time, they didn't have the technology to do, they didn't really do age progressed photos because that was a new thing. And so the last photo they had of John List was when he was 46 years old. And each lead that the police would get or that the FBI would get it was just a dead end. It was nothing. It was a false sighting. It was somebody seeing him in Alabama or something like that, and it just led to nothing. And it was so frustrating and almost like a big FU to the precinct and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because this guy he single-handedly took out his entire family and then just had evaded the police for so long, and they really, really wanted to catch him, and they were determined. So it was at the precinct, at this point, it was 15 years that John List had evaded the police. So when they would go on vacation to different places, they would actually send postcards back to the precinct and say, "Wish you were here," and they would sign it John List. And it was kind of a dark inside joke, because at this point, they just had no idea where he was. Where in the world is John List? So around 1988, a show started to become pretty popular, and this show was called America's Most Wanted, hosted by none other than John Walsh. And if you guys want me to cover the John Walsh story, which is absolutely tragic, but it is one of those things that something really terrible happened, but a lot of good things happened because of the tragedy that happened to John and Adam Walsh. If you guys want me to cover that case, please let me know in the comments down below, and thumbs up this video and let me know, and I will do that, because I've been considering it for a very long time, because that is a case that is heart-wrenching, but I do believe it is also another word of caution. By the time the case was 17 years old, it was a 17-year-old cold case, the FBI and the police, they were watching this America's Most Wanted show, and they got this idea, hey, what if we get this case, this unsolved cold case of John List on the show? What if we air it? Because at this point, the show is becoming very popular. Lots of people were tuning in, and they possibly thought if they got his story out there and his face, that somebody in the public would recognize him. This man, he didn't kill himself. They didn't believe that he killed himself, because if that were the case, he would have done it at the scene. He would have murdered his family and then himself. Similar to how we believe that Robert Fisher is probably still out there, because he murdered his family, and if he was going to commit suicide, he more than likely would have done it at the scene of the crime, and he would have done it with them there or close by or something like that. So they approached America's Most Wanted, and at first the show said no. because they said this case was way too old. They didn't have updated photos of him, and it took the FBI and the police 9 months of pleading for them to feature John List's case on the show. And finally, they agreed. And John Walsh himself has said, once I learned more about the case and I saw that he had murdered his children in cold blood, he said, I want to catch this goddamn son of a bitch, and we're going to feature him on this show, and we're going to catch him, and he's going to pay for what he did. And this is when, you know, a huge break began in the case, and things started to look up for the FBI and the police in Westfield, New Jersey. Okay guys, sorry if the setup looks a little bit different. It's been about 2 hours since I was filming and got a little interrupted. Anyway, as I was saying, it took the FBI about 9 months of repeated requests to be put on the show America's Most Wanted so that they could feature John List and hope that somebody had seen him within the last 17 years and had some idea of where his whereabouts could possibly be. It was a long shot, but if anybody was going to help expose him and find him, they definitely believed in the power of John Walsh and the media. This is one of the first cases, I would say, where media and the police work actually integrated very, very well in order to make a successful capture. As you guys know, this is a solved case, so it's not a surprise that it's solved. So what's kind of crazy is around the same time, John had actually gotten offered another job, this time back in Richmond, Virginia, which is crazy because he had lived there before, if you remember prior in the story. So they moved out there. He moved out there with his new wife, Dolores Miller, and he found another quiet accounting job, and they found a quiet little house, and basically he just led a very normal life. He would go to work, and on the weekends he would garden, and he would like to watch television. What's ironic about this entire thing is that one of his favorite programs was actually America's Most Wanted. And allegedly, according to John List, is that 1 to 2 months prior to his story being exposed on America's Most Wanted, he thought to himself, I wonder if my case will ever be featured on there. And I think it was like a fleeting thought, and it never occurred to him again until... So on May 21st, 1989 is when America's Most Wanted finally aired the almost 18-year-old case of John List. And in fact, John Walsh began the episode stating, this is one of our oldest cases to date. And I think he said this case happened about 17 years ago, because it was right on the cusp between 17 and 18 years that he had evaded law enforcement capture. At the time, of course, they did not have the greatest age progression software as we do now. Like you guys have seen, if you've watched any true crime cases or missing person cases, the government has really great sketch artists that can kind of age progress a photo of someone, even like baby photos, to what they might possibly look like today based off of, you know, people in their family, things like that. So they actually hired a man named, he's a forensic sculptor named Frank Vender. He's the one who actually constructed the John List face. He did a bust, a sculpt, and hopefully obviously I will include pictures of that in here because it's amazing. And he went into so much detail. He tried to think about who John List was as a person, how much he would take care of himself, what sort of life he would lead, because some people, as they age, they tend to look better. Like that happens a lot, you know, nowadays especially, but back then, who knows how much. And then he looked at pictures of his parents, and he noticed that they had like kind of hanging jowls. And then he said List is someone that, even though he's not that important, he wants to feel more important. So he's not someone who's going to wear contacts. He's not that narcissist, or not that, he doesn't care that much about his appearance to like wear contacts instead of glasses, but he is someone that is more than likely going to wear dark frames. So on this clay bust after he did all of the detail work and whatnot. He aged the bust based off of the photo of John from 46 years old. So he aged him about almost 2 decades. And the final touch was these glasses. And he said he's someone that would wear dark rimmed glasses. And you guys, lo and behold, John List, when he was captured, he was wearing dark rimmed glasses, because Frank said basically somebody like this, you know, they psychologically profiled him. The FBI always does that to people that they're looking into, and they figured that this is someone that would want to feel like they look a little bit smarter, maybe a little bit more important than they actually believe to be themselves. And so that was one of the things, that was one of the details that really, I believe, was the icing on the cake and what actually really helped to capture John. So obviously in the episode, they discussed his crimes and, you know, all the horrific things he did, what he might be doing, how he was an accountant, his mannerisms, how he's a quiet guy, you know, all of those things that we discussed in the beginning of this video. After the show aired, over 200 tips were called in claiming that they had seen John List, that there were sightings of him, and they were pretty certain that this was the guy. And a lot of tips they looked into were false leads. It just wasn't the right guy. But there was a call that came from Denver, Colorado, and it happened to be the old neighbor that actually was one of the friends of his new wife. So it was John List's old neighbor, but she knew him as Bob Clark. And based off of the bust sculpture and the descriptive details, she said, I know for a fact that is John List. And she said him and his wife just moved to Richmond, Virginia. And so the name of the woman that actually called in the tip that led to his arrest was Wanda Flannery. She was the neighbor, and she and her daughter actually remembered seeing, you know, John List and his mannerisms. And one thing was they said the glasses. And when Frank did the bust, the sculpt of him, he even put him in a suit because he figured that that was something that he would probably always be wearing, and that is definitely what he always wore. So that Frank guy, if it wasn't for him, I feel like this man could probably still be at large. 11 days later, the FBI found out where his home was located, and they showed up at his door. I believe there were how many agents? So it was June 1st, 1989. Federal agents came to John's house in Richmond, Virginia. So he was at work at the time. His wife, Dolores, answered the door, and she's like absolutely out of her mind. She's like, this is not possible. This is not my husband is not John List. You have the wrong man. You guys are out of your mind. My husband is Bob Clark. This is where he works. If you want to go talk to him and clear this all up, this is his place of work. And so 2 agents went to his place of work, and they went and talked to him, and they said, are you Robert Clark? And he said, yes, I am. And then they said, are you John List? And he said, no, of course not. And they said, basically, I guess that they had high reason to believe that he's definitely John List. And they ended up taking him down to the precinct or the FBI office. I don't know exactly which one it was. And they fingerprinted him. Well, guess what? 1 month prior to the murder of his family, John List had gotten a gun permit. And in order to get a gun permit, you have to get fingerprinted. And guess whose fingerprints matched exactly those of John List's on the gun permit? Robert Clark's. So he was literally caught red-handed. I mean, there was no denying that that was him. So that exact day, June 1st, 1989, they arrested and booked him. And for the longest time, he continued to deny that he was John List. He's like adamant, I am not this man. You have the wrong man. I don't care that the fingerprints match. There's a mistake here somehow. blah, 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 the whole freaking spiel. He kept saying, my name is Robert P. Clark.
I says to them, you know, John, we know it's you.
The FBI and the police would just say, listen, we know you're not Robert P. Clark. We are fully aware that you are John List. Just give it up already. Just give it up. We caught you. We finally caught you. So they extradited him. So on June 29th, 1989, they extradited him from Richmond, Virginia, back to Westfield, New Jersey, where the New Jersey Police Precinct had maintained every single piece of evidence immaculately from the crime scene. So his DNA was on everything. There was no doubt about it that this was the man that committed those heinous murders. And the most damning piece of evidence that they ultimately had was that 5-page confession. But there was a little bit of trouble with that at first. They did interview him, and a criminal psychiatrist interviewed him, and he stated that based off of his interaction with John List, he was mild-mannered, courteous, soft-spoken, and very precise and to the point. He had a 4-hour interview with him and after his arrest and extradition to Westfield, New Jersey. The psychiatrist also said that he expressed no remorse, no shame, and no guilt. He said what he did express was superficial regret, but no guilt or anything whatsoever. And when he spoke of the crimes that he committed, he basically said, he made it seem like a business transaction, like he had no other choice other than to murder his entire family. Like that was the way he was going to get everybody into heaven. The psychiatrist did determine that he did have OCD, but no other psychological problems. So there was no way, like this man was of sound mind. He knew exactly what he was doing. He couldn't plead insanity. Like obviously that's what they were going to go for. But the psychiatrist determined that while this guy is obviously screwed up, he's not mentally insane. So the trial began on April 2nd, 1990 in the Superior Court of New Jersey. John List's defense basically tried to blame it on his personality disorder. So the question in the court wasn't if he committed the crime, whether he was willfully able to deliberately determine his actions. And the defense also argued that the 5-page letter to his priest or pastor should not be admissible in court because of pastor-parishioner privilege, which the pastor actually went on record and said, yeah, I don't think that this should be admissible. The judge, of course, let that, he said that definitely is allowed to be, used as evidence. Also, the defense argued that the police had illegally searched and seized illegal search and seizure, because basically when they went into his house, they went in there without a warrant. Now they argued, well, we did because he abandoned his property, and the defense said he didn't abandon his property whatsoever.
Confidentiality between a minister and his parishioners applies to List. Earlier, the judge allowed other letters admitted as evidence in the murder trial. And News 4's Gloria Rojas reports from Elizabeth, New Jersey.
John List's attorney claimed that when the police entered the List house in Westfield and discovered the 5 bodies of his family, the police were violating List's constitutional rights.
This is the type of search that is precluded, that should be precluded under the Constitution.
Elijah Miller maintains that without a search warrant, the police had no right to enter the house, that List had not abandoned his house, and therefore the prosecution isn't entitled to use as evidence the notes John List left behind. But Judge William Wertheimer allowed the material into evidence.
Anyone who doubts his intent to abandon all that he had forsaken need only conjure a mental image of defendant being returned to New Jersey under an assumed name in leg irons and handcuffs and refer to the factual findings infra. There can be no clearer portrait of a person who has abandoned his past.
One of the notes allowed into evidence is a letter to Helen List's mother, whose daughter and 3 grandchildren had been murdered. And it reads, "At this time, I know that they were all Christians. I couldn't be sure of that in the future as the children grew up." Another note was to the sister of his 84-year-old mother, who was also killed in the house. He wrote in part, "To save mother untold anguish over that result, I felt it best that she be relieved from this veil of tears." And in the midst of the massacre on November 9th, John List, the careful planner, tied up some loose ends in business when he wrote to a business associate about the best prospects for a quick sale. Despite their bizarre nature, the defense didn't want the letters in evidence. The defense, however, will be based on mental defect. But one letter in particular has its own battle in court. John List left a written explanation for Reverend Eugene Raywinkle, his pastor. The defense says that communication is protected by the special confidentiality between a priest or pastor and the penitent.
So is your testimony that you regarded that letter to be confidential?
Absolutely.
Pursuant to what privilege?
Pastor, parishioner, priest, penance.
More witnesses will be heard tomorrow on the priest-penitent issue. Then the judge will decide whether that controversial, telling letter will be part of the evidence the jury hears. Gloria Rojas, News 4, New Jersey.
The letter to the pastor allegedly goes into details about List's motives.
And the judge said it is obviously perfectly crystal clear. A man that murders his entire family, leaves a 5-page letter explaining why, books 2,000 miles away, starts a new life, changes his name, gets a new social security number, an entire new identity in life. That's clear abandonment of your property, and the police were well within their rights to go inside of the home. So basically, they tried and to no avail. So they said that the defense also tried to say he had diminished mental capacity brought on by his OCD, but that didn't do anything for his case either. The trial took about 2 weeks, and on April 11th, 1990, the trial concluded. And the next day, the jury deliberated for 9 hours, and they found him guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. On May 1st, he had a sentencing date, and he finally spoke about it. He did say something about being sorry, but it was not well received. And unfortunately, because the murders took place in 1971 prior to New Jersey reinstating the death penalty, the highest sentence the judge could give him was 5 consecutive life sentences. So that is what he got.
I never heard a courtroom break out in applause.
Court's adjourned.
The entire courtroom applauded after the judge laid out the sentence. Like, they literally applauded. Like, this is a very rare thing to be seen in a courtroom, because obviously you want to be respectful to the judge and the courts, and you're not supposed to be making noise. You're not, I mean, regardless, you're not supposed to be interjecting or anything like that. But literally everybody in that courtroom, obviously except for the defense and his client, applauded the judge. It is to be noted that the defense did try to get an appeal 2 different times. One time was because, I forget what one of them was, but one that stood out the most was they said that he had post-traumatic stress disorder from being in the military, and the judge completely and angrily dismissed that appeal like that. Like, he didn't even give it a second thought, really, because this guy clearly knew what he was doing. He had been psychiatrically evaluated. He was of sound mind when he did it. He premeditated it. When he went to the bank, when he wrote those letters to the children's school, when he took out the money, when he ceased the mail from coming to the house, this guy knew exactly what he was doing. He planned the whole thing, you know, down to leaving the lights on and turning the air down. Like, he knew exactly what he was doing. There was no getting around it. This was not even a crime of passion. This was cold-blooded murder. And what the defense was trying to get was second-degree murder. Murder in the second degree. But no, they got first-degree murder on all 5 counts. And he did die on March 21st, 2008. It says from complications of pneumonia. And that was while he was in Trenton, New Jersey, obviously in the penitentiary. That's basically it, you guys. Like, that's... I feel like that was a really lengthy video and a lot of information, but this case, I don't really have a lot of words. Like, it's just insane. And the fact that he did all of this because of money issues, and it was later found out that obviously this guy was crazy but not insane, and he probably would have done this regardless, but the fact that they found out later on that the stained glass was original, I believe Tiffany glass, something like that, worth $100,000, he had no idea. Like, that could have solved all of the money problems. It's just an ironic little twist. It's just a weird little tidbit of information. I thought that was so interesting to find out. The fact that he could have solved all of his money problems with just that stained glass alone is crazy. And it just goes to show you, like, there's always a solution. You do not have to resort to murder, to destroying people's lives. Like, karma will come and get you. It might take 17, 18 years, but I promise you, karma's gonna come for you, and it will be just, and it will be legal, and I promise you it's gonna happen. And that's all I have to say. Okay guys, so that is it for today's crazy ride of a solved case. If you guys like solved cases, please thumbs up this video and let me know what other cases you would like me to cover. And yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on this. This case gave me the chills, and I thought I'd seen it all with the Robert Fisher case, and then I started looking into this case because so many of you guys voted on me covering this case, and I just couldn't believe what I was listening and reading and just learning about this man and what he did and how he was able to just evade the police, the FBI. And I love the fact that John Walsh had a huge part in his capture. And if you guys want me to cover the Adam Walsh case and how John Walsh came to be and that entire story, I would love to. Let me know in the comments down below. Thumbs up this video. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and giving this case your time. As I've said before, even solved cases, they always have a form of a lesson to be learned within them. And I think that it is important to cover them and to give the victims of these cases, you know, like, not let them be forgotten, if that makes any sense. Thank you guys so much for giving the List family your time, minus John, of course. And yeah, please remember to always be kind to yourself and others. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I promise I'm not going to spam you or anything like that. If you turn on the notification bell, you will just be notified the moment I post my next video, which I'm trying to post a lot more often for you guys because you guys seem to be really into the quality and the content that I've been posting lately, and I've been working really hard to improve for you guys. So thank you for noticing, and yeah, I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one, which will be soon. I love you so much. Mwah. Bye.